Good morning and welcome to today's session, which is the second event in our Thinking Forward Thought Leadership programme. In today's event, we discuss the question, dashboards, do they improve engagement? A very topical subject in the industry and one that many people have a view on. Standard Life is part of Phoenix Group, the largest retirement and savings provider in the UK. As a group, we are privileged to serve over 13 million customers. And with this comes a responsibility to not just serve our customers well, but also to help society more broadly. It's why we launched this specific programme with a focus on bringing international thinking and experience to the challenges facing UK savers. In our first event, we announced the launch of a joint research initiative with the OECD. With them, we are working to improve understanding and accelerate innovation on two areas, DE&I and retirement income. Getting back to dashboards and today's session. Our own customer research shows that most people want to engage with us digitally. While app usage is fairly consistent across all age groups, those over 65 use the website the most. Of course, there will always be exceptions, such as vulnerable customers, but any initiative focused on driving engagement and understanding is a good thing in our opinion, which is why we're supportive of dashboards. Based on the length of time it's taken the UK looking at dashboards, we all know we need all the help we can get. Who better to learn from than the CEO of Min Pension in Sweden, Anders Lundström. Anders was responsible for launching their dashboard in 2004 and is still at the helm of driving innovation and progress. The Swedish pension system is less complex than the UK, and the whole population in Sweden is smaller than the number of customers we have. That said, like the UK, their goal at outset was to drive engagement, which is why I'm absolutely sure we can learn from the Swedish experience. Without further ado, I'd now like to formally welcome Anders Lundström, CEO of Min Pension, who will share his journey and experience. Over to you, Anders.
Thank you, Sangeeta, and thanks also for inviting me here to talk about the Swedish pension dashboard, My Pension. I've been working with pension dashboards for more than 18 years now, and if I would conclude all that into just one sentence, it would be this. Creating a pension dashboard is a long, complicated, and even a painful process. But on the other hand, when you look back at it, a few years later, you can see that you make a big difference to many people. Going into retirement is one of the most difficult financial decisions a private person will do, and you will make a big difference with a pension dashboard. The story behind My Pension started in the late 1990s. It was a new pension system that was introduced in Sweden. We got the first new pillar, introducing the premium funds. You have the possibility to choose from more than 800 different funds. People got a lot of information about this, and people were very confused about, is this a state pension or is it occupational pension? And all of a sudden, all the occupational pensions, they also started to move from DB into DC schemes. So it was even more information that was sent out, new pension benefit statements, and the problem was not, it wasn't any information about the future pension, but it was too much of information. At that point, the state started to discuss, together with the private insurance sector, started to discuss, is it possible to take information from occupational pension, the benefit statements, and add together with the orange envelope, that is the first pillar pension benefit statement. And of course, there was a lot of discussions about tax. That's one of the usual questions in Sweden. And there was a lot of hot topics on this and a lot of discussions between the state and pension providers. And lastly, the state said, well, if you do not cooperate, we will have to legislate about this. So the insurance industry created a compromise, and the compromise was the My Pension Dashboard or company. The company started in 2004, and it's a public-private partnership. It's 50% financed by the state and 50% from the private insurance sector. And the state also have 50% of the memberships in the board, and the private sector also have 50%. Today we cover all the three pillars. We have about 99.8% of the Swedish pension market that is represented on the dashboard today. so it's a very good thing. It wasn't that in the beginning, but I will come back to that too. And we also provide a lot of multi-channel services. We provide both a dashboard and website, and also API, and the possibility for people who are not using internet or don't have any internet access to call the customer service and get help too. So when we started in 2004, we had a product that covered about 60% of occupational pension schemes and fully 100% of the state pension. That product wasn't that good, and we had market research indicating that the users would be mostly female, low or middle income, didn't have any private pensions, and didn't have any financial advisor. When we started in December 2004, the first users we got, almost everyone was male, high income, had private pensions, had financial advisors. So we had high expectations of a dashboard, but we could only deliver a small part of that. So it was a bad match in the beginning. So just trying to survive during this phase, I usually call this phase the survival and learn phase. We added a lot of new functionality to meet that customer segment that was more engaged in their pension. So we started to have the possibility to add the policies manually, and we did the projections on the manual entries too. So you could get a holistic view, but you needed to do some work yourself. In the beginning, the website was very static. It was quite shallow with information, and people did have to wait up to about 2 days to get all the information. What we did after about 18 months was to start a new project to actually put all of this in the dump. We rebuilt 95% of all the dashboard and threw all the source code away. It was quite a brave decision at that time, but we had learned so much during this first 18 months, so we had a lot of new learnings that we could add into a dashboard. And we started to getting more information, because when you don't have any information or you have any pension providers connected to a dashboard, you don't get any users because we won't get the holistic view. So we started to create a lot of new different pension provider initiatives, trying to get them to connect and getting more information. And the more information we got, the more granular information we got, the more you could spot the cracks within the dashboard. But we had quite a good growth of both pension providers connecting and also new users. But we had to work a lot, and until I would say about 2010, to focus on the quality of the information that was delivered to the dashboard at that time. It was a lot of tough work, and it was a lot of tough work even for the industry, because transparency hurts a lot in the beginning, because it's a bad customer relationship if you don't have any trust in the information that you deliver. And we'll keep working on, and I would say in 2014 we had a problem, because we had reached all the different goals that the board had set up for us. And if you have a state and we have a private insurance sector in the same board, it will be a problem, because it will take a lot of time to set up a new common goal for the dashboard. But we did a lot of user studies and a lot of research work during 2014. And actually after that, we decided to go for a new thing. We were informing people a lot. We didn't want them to understand, or we didn't match their expectations. They got the information, but as one user said, well, I got that all the information, but you leave me out there. I don't know what to do now. So what's the next step? How can we get people to make well-informed decisions and get them more engaged in their pension? So we started a lot of new projects here. We started to build a totally new website. We started to look at segmentation and more like a data-driven development from more like a customer experience perspective. And we'll start looking at the different segments that we were talking about at that time. It's 10 different segments that we're talking about. We have the age, the lower age, 16 to 28, and 29 to 54. That's the mid-age. And close to retirement, 55 to 64. And when we have a more like a standard retirement age in Sweden, that's 65. And on the left-hand side, you can see people with low interest or knowledge, or in the middle, medium interest or knowledge. And on the right-hand side, you can see high interest or knowledge. So if we take this segment model and apply it on the Swedish population, it would look like this. And you can see that people mid-age and lower age, younger people, there's quite a big share there who doesn't care about the pension, have a low interest or knowledge about it. And we could see that people close to retirement, you can see all the different knowledge parts, they are equal there. Because closer to retirement, you get a much more engagement, yes, to learn about your future pension. This is the part that will affect your next 20 years financial situation. And if 2015, if we take a look at the main pension existing users at that time and apply that to the different user segments, it looks like this. And you can see that on the top right-hand corner, people close to retirement, good knowledge, and probably with good salaries too, are very interested and overrepresented at the dashboard at that time. So these people up here on the right-hand corner, they made a lot of noise too, because we wanted to add new functionality, more details, more on very low level and the granular level. And we could see that we were missing out the part for people, especially younger people with low knowledge and interest in pensions. So we started to look, what can we do to achieve or reach these groups? So we started to look at them, and we made a few assumptions that we started to try out. And we would like to try new improvements for the user interface, especially simplification. We're starting to discuss more about information in different layers, a high level, on a very abstract high level, and then we will drill down to further details later on. So we want people to be more curious and start some triggers about their pension. And we also put up API solutions to take away all the hurdles, to create a better accessibility to the information. So what's not just the dashboard, we try to put a distribution of information too. And we created a lot of seamless logons to increase the accessibility to the dashboard too. If you were on the internet bank, you have the possibility to hit the button there to go seamlessly into the dashboard. And we also put up a lot of multi-channel distribution, as I mentioned before. So if we start to look at one of the parts where we built an API solution, and this is an example from the Swedish Pension Agency, who has applied our API that is shown on the pension provider side. And you can see it's a very easy, you just if you have a few handles, you can grab there, and you can change the retirement age. You can't do that much here, but you can see there's a lot of interaction, just dragging the slider and trying out different retirement ages. And what we also could see that the information that we displayed, did people make the right conclusions from the information? If you're just looking at the graph and the test that we did, a few people did the right conclusions from the graph, but most people made the wrong conclusions. So we added an extra table up on the right, just to improve the information. But people still fully didn't understand the information, and we still didn't make the right conclusion. So what we did was that we added an extra text up on the top left, explaining the context, explaining what you see, and then we also made the conclusion and told them, this is, if you compare your salary just before retirement, you will get X kronor less in retirement. So it was very hands-on to get people to understand how we should make conclusions of information. So if we move on and look at the mostly mid-aged and medium or good knowledge about pension, we were talking about a different user group and different approaches to get the information to. We could see that these user groups or segments, we were not just going to a dashboard, we were using different ways to get there. They searched Google, AltaVista or whatever, but we were using search engines. And we didn't have that content on the website at the beginning, but we started to add a lot of news and articles, pods, discussing things to create some kind of engagement and better knowledge about this. And we could see that there was a lot of life decisions that people were going to make. Going to buy a new house, changing jobs, getting babies, getting married, or whatever. So we could see if we could get the right content and get the right trigger, we could get them into the dashboard. And we can see that people or users who are coming from the search engines, the users stay about 3 minutes longer than the average user. So we have a task to fulfill and do it. And we also try to create a lot of new functionality to increase interest, changing the presentation format, having more like the information layers, and also try to create a little more funny parts and viral effects so you can get people to discuss this back home or at the coffee table at their work. So if we start to look at the new functionality that they added, if we start up with the accrued pension, here we try to apply a lot of layered information. First of all, we get a holistic view of a pension. You can see how much you have per provider and what kind of investment options you have, if you can do anything with it or not. And when we move on to the first pillar, the first holistic overview, get the income pension, premium pension, and here you can drill down to get further information, a lot of details. You can see if there's any decumulation, what kind of fees you have, what funds do I have, what's the value of them. So it's a lot of information that you can just drill down to. And also the same for occupational pension. You can share or decide what you would like to see and just drill down the information. And if we talk about younger people, they don't do that many projections. They mostly stayed on this part of on the dashboard list trying to understand the accrued pensions. And we also have the same apply also for the third pillar too. If we move on to more of a digital playground for the pension nerds, this is the projections tool that we have that is implemented, and this is not for the low interest user, of course, but you can do a lot of different projections here. Of course, you can change the retirement age, both in general for all different policies that you have, but also on a policy level. We have a granularity so that you can choose from both year and month, and you have also the possibility to change jobs and pension schemes, changing salaries, and you can also look at the different financial growth, how that will affect your future pension. So there's a lot of things that you can play around with here. And we also have a functionality more that I was actually a little bit afraid when we started to test this one. We tried to get people more engaged and try to understand more of their future pension. And people looked at the projection and then we said, well, okay, I understand this, but well, how do I compare to others in the same situation? So that gave us the idea to create a comparison of a pension to others. And here you can see you can compare yourself with the same pension scheme that you are in. You compare with female, male, different age groups, and also for different income groups, and see how well off or how bad you are. And you could think that this would create a lot of anxiety amongst people, but actually it was almost the opposite, because we added the functionality in the end, or the lower part. We have a green figure icon there, indicates, well, I'm happy with this result, but what can I do to maintain it? So you drill down, you get a checklist. So what more information can I get to do that? Is there any call to actions that I need to do? The blue one indicates, well, it was what I expected, but can I improve my pension? What can I do? And of course, you have the red thing there. I was very disappointed with this. What can I do? And here we have a lot of different information depending on your age, if you're close to retirement or if you have a few more years in accumulation phase. But actually, unfortunately, we can't put this on Facebook due to data protection regulation. But we can see a lot of people are engaged in different groups on the internet, discussing how well they were off in the comparison to others, both if they are bad or it's a good feeling for them. So this is a good way to get people more engaged and start their journey to a better pension. And if you talk about the users very close to retirement, it has been a huge project that we've been working on for about 5 years. And here we talk about people who is in the planning phase and also for the decumulation phase. But we had a lot of user stories that was very funny. People mentioned, we had one lady who mentioned that she went out to her summer house, took her 3 children with her, and spread out all the pension benefit statements on the floor and pinned them one by one, took away all the duplicates and tried to figure out, how can I do this? How can I retire? So she was very disappointed actually when we built this, but she was happy for the following pensioners or retireds. But what we have done here, unfortunately I don't have a video on it here today, but what we have done, you can see the graphical interface is just the same. We have added a lot of new functionality to look at taxes in different ways. You can see both net and gross. And you have a lot of drill down feature on the policy level. You can change year, month. You can play around with things like financial growth or change in pension schemes or that. So it's more restricted area here, but it's much more accurate than the projection tool. And you can compare the projections for each policy here if you want to. If you look at in the middle of the screen here, you can see the default alternative or the option that you have today, that's X kronor. If I change that into from 5 years to 10 years, you will get a new amount there. So you can do it instantly and simultaneously and also see the holistic overview at the same time. There is a possibility to add more than 99 different scenarios. So you can also compare different scenarios to each other. And when you get closer to retirement, you will also get a to-do list and a lot of reminders when you have to apply for pension. And you will also get a more little bit visit what you should think about. But this is also a tool. This is more of a complicated view, but we also have a lot of different templates. So if you just want to have a straight retirement, I want to have more like a flat amount for the rest of my retirement, it's a big possibility to do it here too. So just click that button and the system creates your retirement plan automatically. Actually, we've been seeing a lot of changes in the behavior for people who is going to be retired. We can see there's a lot of more people who used the default alternatives before at withdrawal. So we choose the default with 5 years withdrawal period. Now we can see that almost everybody is using the tool or opting for a life annuity instead. And we can also see that people tend to work longer, maybe going part-time or earlier, like 63 years, but keep on working 70% or 75% up to the age of 68. And we have seen a totally new behavior among the new retired people. And lastly, I just would like to share what's up next for us. We will, in the 3rd or 4th quarter this year, we will add up a lot of new customer information at policy transfer. So you can easily compare what you have with what you have been proposed to move or transfer your policy to. You can compare all the different fees, if there's any guarantees, and also health exam, things like that that might be needed. And we're also looking at the possibility to present ESG or sustainability information together with the pension information on the dashboard. We will continue to work with the API and add more functionality. As you saw before, the API is quite shallow information. You don't get that many details. So we're looking at the possibility to have a more of a data sharing possibility in the future. Of course, that's a political questions too. Data sharing is it's tough because it gets very transparent to each policy provider. And of course, we're also always looking at the extended information standard and adding new features on the dashboard. That's all for me, but Neil, I would be interested in your views on what I have talked about here can translate to the UK.
Oh, well, thank you, Anders, and thank you more generally for all the engagement we've had over the last couple of days. It's been really interesting here. You speak to many stakeholders. I think there's a lot that we've all got to think about with the insight that's come from that. For me, there's probably two big takeaways from what we've heard there that are immediately jumping to mind. So the first is really in that initial experience that Anders has in terms of, what can we expect for an initial dashboard? What does success look like? How do we get realistic about that? And then the second area is about really understanding the customer need. So obviously Anders talked about how initially there was a very specific segment of customers, they expected to engage with it, and actually that was very different in practice. So how do we really think about that? How do we make sure we're understanding the customer need and learning from that as we develop? So going back to the first area, what should we expect early on? I don't know. I think what we're going to be seeing here is a lot of providers coming to the table, supplying their data, really trying to give some good coverage for the dashboard. But we need to go make sure that we're balancing a couple of things. So how do we get initial momentum? How do we get progress with this initiative? And how do we actually make sure that we don't let perfection get in the way of that so that we can get something to engage customers with and iterate? Probably the second area is the more interesting one for me though. So going back to why are we building a dashboard? So we've said it's about engagement, but what do we really mean by that? And for me, just building a dashboard and making that information available isn't enough. We need to be quite clear with, well, why are we doing that for members? What are they going to use it for? How will that greater access to their data actually really help drive better member outcomes? And for me, this really comes back to something else we've talked about this year, which is the guidance gap. So for me, the guidance gap is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, areas that are really going to impact member outcomes going forward. So if we can really solve how we better support customers in the run-up to and then at retirement, that's going to give them a far better result as they move into the retirement phase. But trying to do that in just a small slither of their pension is really challenging. How do we actually go and make it relevant for them? So going back to the pension dashboard itself is an enabler of how we do that in a far, far better way. And that's really exciting. So that's some of the initial observations I've had thinking about it. I'm sure I'm going to have a lot more over the coming days and weeks because, there's been a lot of engagement and a lot of really interesting points that have come. So those are my thoughts. I'm quite interested, though, in hearing from Sharon, who has been speaking to our clients, our advisors, our trustees that we deal with. Sharon, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Neil. Interest is certainly growing amongst our clients, trustees and advisors on this topic. So it's great to be able to share some of the views coming through and also pose some of the questions that we're starting to get asked. So now would be an appropriate point to remind our audience that you've got an opportunity to send us through any questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer them. If we do run out of time though, we will follow up with any of your unanswered questions through your relationship manager. There are some common themes coming through on what clients, trustees and advisors feel is needed in order for the UK dashboard to be successful, such as the need to make sure that the dashboard is easy to access and use for all members. That also means thinking about multi-channel approaches to maximise take-up rates, as not all members are online. So what do we need to do for the offline populations? That's something we need to think about. There's also a need to make sure that the communications wrapped around the dashboard are clear, simple, easy to follow and jargon-free. That's led to a question around terminology and naming conventions. So for example, we know Standard Life has its own member dashboard where members can log on to access information on their pension. Will members find this confusing when the UK dashboard goes live? What will the differences be, and what are our thoughts on how we plan to help members navigate through all the options that will be available to them in the future? There's also an appetite to understand what information and tools will be made available to help support members with their conclusions and make decisions to help them with their retirement planning. The importance of good quality data, robust controls and oversight is considered hugely important for the dashboard to be successful, as it will play a key role in building trust with all the stakeholders. And staying on the subject of data, we know some trustees are looking for clarity around data management, roles and responsibilities. And in the contract space, there's definitely a need for clarity on how the dashboard works with GDPR responsibilities. So there's a clear key theme emerging that the dashboard needs to be easy to use, and that communications are simple to understand. Members need to have the ability to interact through the dashboard using helpful tools. They also need to be able to make contact with the providers easily when needed. So while there is wide support for members to have access to all their pensions through one dashboard, it would be fair to say that there are still many questions unanswered at this stage. There's also some acknowledgement that it's likely to be a challenging journey for the industry to achieve all the requirements set out in time for the June 2023 date. There's also awareness of the level of complexity and amount of work involved to get there, as Anders alluded to at the start. Clients, trustees and advisors are looking to hear from us regularly as we develop our plans and take them on the journey with them. Some are also interested in having an opportunity to help shape our plans and work more closely with us to help their members get a great experience. So I guess in conclusion, Neil, what we're hearing is ultimately what matters most to clients and trustees is that their members have easy access to the right level of information and support, helping to make informed decisions for retirement. We too share those views as they strongly align with our social purpose of helping members to achieve a life of possibilities. So Sangeeta, that's a lot of the themes that we're starting to hear come through from our audiences. I'll now hand back to you to see what questions we're getting through.
Thanks very much, Sharon, and thank you, Anders, and thank you, Neil, for that. What a fascinating 30 minutes it's been. I've certainly learned an awful lot this morning already, and I just encourage you to ask as many questions as you can through our Q&A facility. We've had a few come through, and I'll probably start with a question for Anders, if I can put you on alert for this. I mean, our topic today is really to sort of challenge the question of, can dashboards drive engagement? One of the recent studies we've seen from the ABI has identified that a target audience of younger age groups, those aged between 18 to 34, that might be particularly interested in the UK dashboard. Do you have any experience you can share from Sweden of your own journey and whether the success in Sweden has been to drive actual engagement with that sort of age group? Over to you, thanks.
Thank you. After recreating the dashboard into the new version, we can see we have increased a lot in younger years, and today we have about 39 years or less. That represents about 31% of our users. When we were at 2015, I would say we had less than 10% of that age. So it's a huge difference in different ways to both having the accessibility to the information, but also how you try to engage people in different ways.
Excellent. Well, that's very encouraging for us all to hear. Just staying with you for a moment, Anders, on the topic of engagement. I think all of us sort of are believers that obviously digital technologies are a good thing, but there are always going to be groups of people. Sharon, you alluded to it as well. Themes coming back from our clients already about some customers don't want to interact digitally. Did you have that same experience in Sweden, and how did you cater for it if you did?
Yeah, we have an eligible group for the dashboard, about 6.5 million people, and we have about 700,000 out of these people do not want to use the internet or prefer some kind of manual services or anything like that. We haven't served them on the dashboard for a little bit. We have provided tools for others to give them the right information. The pension agents in Sweden today, we have a possibility to have their customer support to connect it to the dashboard, so we can have their PIN code by phone and some kind of a secure ID to get the information. So we get the manual service there. So that's one possibility. And we also have the possibility that the pension agency do a lot of being out in the shopping malls, things like that, informing people. So we are standing there, being connected to the dashboard, and the possibility to connect through ID. And we also have from the employer side, we have what's called the occupational scheme day once a year. It's not the cinnamon bun day, but almost the same. But that's the day where all the different employers inform their employees about the occupational pension scheme. We are included in some of them, but there's a lot of activities going on at the companies and helping people getting into the dashboard. And we can also see, like Volvo today, it's compulsory or mandatory to just enter the dashboard and register on the dashboard. Volvo as a company, they say, well, you need to learn about your occupational pension scheme, but you also need to enter the dashboard to get the information from other employers before. So there's a lot of work going on from different parties here. So it's not just the dashboard. I would say it's more like the community around pension that helps together and create better information and better engagement.
That's fascinating. And did you say Volvo do that with all employees when they start?
All new employees, yes.
That's brilliant, actually, and maybe interesting for many of our clients that we may have on the call today. But what a responsibility they're taking on board, but fabulous. I'll give you a break for a moment and probably hand over to Neil. Come back to you in a second, Anders. Neil, how ready are Standard Life for dashboards, do you think?
If I've probably learned anything from Anders for the last couple of days, it's to be careful with the answer to that, because I think given everything he's learned about, the data quality, the learns to be there, I wouldn't want to overcommit. However, we have been involved with the dashboard program from the start. We've heavily engaged. We have a program set up. So we are really looking forward to working with the industry on that. Readiness for me, though, doesn't just stop at how are we going to hand that data over into the main dashboard program to make available. It's actually how are we going to go further, how are we going to make use of it, and that's something that we have been doing a lot of work on. So how do we deliver that better guidance that I touched upon before? What are the right ways to engage customers with that? How do we actually add the most value? What are the problems they're trying to solve? So I've been doing a lot of work in that space without this data necessarily being easily accessible. Once the dashboard's there, I'm really excited about how we can make those journeys far more value add to members. So yeah, in that regard, I think we're doing a lot to be ready, and I'm really quite excited about how we see this progress.
Great. You touched upon data just there, and I think Anders, you mentioned data as well in your sort of journey experience. How many years did it take for you to get comfortable with the quality of data? At the start, I think it wasn't quite there. Was it a 10-year process, a 1-year process? How quickly did that improve?
Yeah. I would say for the whole experience or customer user experience, it took about 8 years to get a really good data. But I would say that the main groups that had problems was the pay-as-you-go systems. But there was a lot of different qualities, both within the DC and DB schemes, but especially in the pay-as-you-go. And it took about 8 years to get really good quality, and you need to have a good information standard that you get some kind of validation within the data set there too. So there's a lot of learnings where you shouldn't start too small. You need to think a bit further on so you don't do the mistakes that we did in the beginning, because we took what we got and we tried to do something out of it. But as always, you need to start somewhere. It can't be perfect from the start, but you need to start, and you will have a steep learning curve.
I'm going to be really cheeky there and say, do you think we're 8 years behind Sweden then? Or longer?
Do I need to answer that? No, but I think you get a more complicated situation here with much more pension provider and different solutions too. So I think it's quite good to keep it simple, but think forward a lot. And I think that, well, we see about 9-10 years, something like that.
Okay, fascinating. I'm sure we've had a few questions come in on the same topic, and we've heard this sort of question the last couple of days. If you could start again, what would you do differently?
Everything. But I think that the main mistake was at the beginning. The market research was done before I was hired as a CEO, but I would say that when we just started, when we went live, the problem where we didn't match the user segment, but what we could have done was lower the expectations a lot. Because if you have a high expectation and going into dashboard service, and you just get a small part of what you're expecting, you won't be an ambassador for that service. You will just be disappointed. And I think that we should have had some kind of backup strategies earlier, just what if. But in our case, it was going live or going back. We wouldn't have any dashboard if we didn't go live. And that was the last chance for us.
And I sort of empathise with that sort of sentiment. I think you need to have something to start with and iterate. and improve, and then showcase how you can improve the dashboard going forward. If it's a piece of paper, people generally won't take much notice, but if they can see it online and say, here's how you can improve it. So I share that ambition. I'm just sticking with you then for another question, because I think most of the questions, sadly, are coming down your way. Can you comment if the dashboard introduced any competition in the Swedish pension market?
Not in the dashboard, but I would say that most pension advisors, we are using the dashboard together with their clients. So that's another kind of competition. And I think what we would like to do more in the future is adding more APIs and to put up the information in a structured and controlled way to our pension providers and also for the state, and use that information. What we should compete about is not the data, it's the way that we use them and how we can affect or engage users or the pension savers. I think that's a big difference. But within the dashboard, we don't have any competition. But we do have pension advisors who have very advanced tools, but they need a lot of manual handling. We're talking about, we made almost 50 million pre-actions last year, and for each pension saver we have about 8 different policies. So that's a hell of a lot of different pre-actions what we need to do. You can't do that the same way as the pension advisors are, because we are putting in their hands on and adding a bit extra information or things like that. We have a more like a streamlined factory for doing pension pre-actions.
And did you find at all that providers are investing less in their dashboards with the sort of your advanced features coming through your own?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of legislation for them to do pre-action at different retirement ages, things like that. But the pension regulator in Sweden, they have said that it's okay if you just connect it to the dashboard. You don't have to do that on your website or send out statements. Unless, if you don't do it, if you don't connect to a dashboard, you will have to put up the statement, things like that. But we are happy we have a good cooperation and more like a self-regulation in Sweden in this way. So I would say it depends a bit on the different providers, but we have 2 major providers in Sweden who says we have board decisions that we will not interfere in the value chain of my pension or the dashboard, because we are happy with that. It's much better to have a holistic view. What we are doing is more like, how can we take care of our customers when we come from the dashboard? And they are looking more like we can have more like a added value chain, so we can combine the value chains between the dashboard and also for the pension provider. So I think that's the next step, and I didn't mention it here, but we have for a retirement planner, there is a possibility for the user to transfer his pension plan straight to the pension provider and access it to the pension provider website, do a digital authentication, and start his retirement withdrawal. So that's a totally different way to see it, and I think that will be the next really big challenge for us to execute that among ours.
No, absolutely. And does the dashboard, as a question that's come in, allow savings to be accumulated and built in?
Not today,
Not
but
today.
What you will see is the consumer information at policy transfer. And we have a possibility also to add things or policies manually. We know that people are adding their house or that we're going to sell when we get retired, things like that. And also have a private savings on the side that we put on the dashboard too.
Right. And Neil, perhaps you may like to elaborate on that. What do we find from our own experience of clients and members sort of asking for the ability to hold information in one place, for savings as well as pensions?
Yeah, we're certainly see it growing. I think when it comes down to it, it goes down to what are the problems that consumers are trying to solve, and often that's not going to be limited to just a pension. It's about that more holistic problem with how am I going to face into retirement, and it may be some more immediate financial goals. So yeah, certainly some of the research we've done, some of what we've begun to test is really seeing consumer engagement begin to shift as we're able to go and cater for that. So yeah, I think that's an exciting development. We are working pretty hard with one of the alpha partners for the UK Pensions Dashboard technology on that, and they're able to help facilitate the wider sort of open finance and bring through a customers' house value through a Zoopla valuation and really sort of paint that picture. And we've just seen that has really sort of stepped up how consumers are able to think about their finances, the confidence they've got in it, and better equip them for that ultimate retirement planning.
Fabulous. I'll go on to a question for Anders, but I'm going to put you on alert, Sharon, for this too, because I think you'll be able to contribute to this discussion from our own perspective. So we've had a question in around what information is given back to the employers so that they can understand how their employees are using the dashboard, if at all, in Sweden. And Sharon, you may be able to just comment on our own experience of the dashboard we have today and how employers like to see the information.
Today we don't have any information back to the employers, but for the pension providers. So I think it's a little bit different situation in Sweden compared to the UK, but we have a pension provider that is connected and we're responsible for the data, and we connect with them and have more like a statistic reports, things like that.
Right, and then they would be responsible for providing back to the employer.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And in terms of user experience and MI, we've done a lot of work in this space in the last couple of years, obviously on the dashboard and with our client analytics tool as well. So there's numerous sources now that employers and trustees can access to just demonstrate how engaged their workforce is, and actually point in some of the areas where we might be able to support in partnership with advisors, where some of the communications need to be dialed up. So I see that being an increasing space for us on as dashboards evolve, the need for more information and the behaviours coming through. Those are hand in hand for us. So yeah, Neil, that's something we'll be coming to work with you on quite soon, I would imagine.
Look forward to it.
We've got a question here broadly, which I think you may all have a view on, but I'll go to Anders first. And this is around how you sort of tackle engagement from a perspective of different diversity. So whether it's gender or any other factor. So if at the beginning you sort of said you wanted to have the dashboard targeted for women, certain wealth, lower financial understanding, and actually what you got was people that were male, highly engaged, more likely to have a financial advisor. So can you just expand on how you dealt with that and what you did differently to engage a more broader audience? And do you find any other differences that you can call around from a diversity perspective?
Yeah, we're working a lot with more like personas. Yeah. And we try to find the different personas in each segment that we have. But what we try to do is more deliver a lot of more content that has been for like sexes or things, more like female parts. So we have actually we have one person who's only working with adding content more from a wider perspective. What should I think about? And also we have a lot of podcasts discussing a lot of things that is happening during the around the pension system, or to think about. So I would say it's more on a content part now. It's not that more how we present the information or the real data, but it's more just around it. But what we can see is that female users, they are on the website longer, but fewer times. Men are multiple times, but shorter time. And if you look at their possibility to make the right conclusions, the men are guessing in a big way, and the women, we are very more reluctant and say, well, I'm not sure, but they have the right answer. So it's a big difference here how we compare it. And I would say that the female are working more with the logical part of the brain and look a little bit more from the outside and be more logical about the discussions and conclusions. And the men are a bit faster. They make a lot of conclusions. Some of them are wrong, some are right.
Any comments on that from our perspective, on our experience, content?
I think there's probably quite a lot that we're thinking about in this space. So the first thing about inclusivity is we need to make sure we're not excluding people. So how do we build broad comms when we don't necessarily know too much about someone at outset, just to make sure it's not going to turn anyone off. So that for me is a really important area. Something else Anders touched upon earlier in the sort of main presentation was about some of the hierarchies and the ability for people to begin to probe and look multi-channel and get some of the simple data, but actually if they wanted a bit more, they can begin to self-serve that content in the way that suits them best. And that idea of what suits a person best is certainly some of the thinking we're beginning to have. So how do we give the person the opportunity to self-identify a little bit more and get content served to them in a way that matters, be that channel, be that the tone of voice, be all these different aspects. So that's certainly an exciting area for us in terms of how we can make sure that something's a lot more impactful for the customer as they look to engage with their retirement.
Thank you, Neil. We've still got lots of questions coming through, so Anders, I'm going to fire this one to you as well. So the Swedish Dashboard, does it offer any transactional capability, i.e. the ability to consolidate pensions, change address? And if so, to what extent does this increase engagement with users?
It's an ongoing discussion. We don't have it yet. But I would guess either the infrastructure behind the dashboard or some kind of functionality in the dashboard within a few years. But it's a political question.
Like all things, actually. So a question coming over to you again on data. I think that's been quite a topical one for the whole week, really. Have you had any sort of incidences with cybersecurity breaches, loss of data, any of those aspects over your lifetime of work there?
No breaks, but we have had a lot of different aspects of problem with data. We have duplicates, we have data that has disappeared over the new year, things like that. But I would say that's a part of building up a more mature organization from a pension provider's perspective too, because it takes a long time to get all the different routines in place, and you will have a lot of different ways to deliver the information too. And I think that I would say it took at least 2 years to get it on top of mind for pension providers to deliver information. But as soon as you get the dashboard becoming known and it's regularly used, it will be a customer demand. So it will be handled automatically. If we don't deliver data or do anything wrong from a pension provider, it will be spilled back on the pension provider, and the customers will complain at the pension provider. In that case, it comes into a top priority.
Thank you. And sticking with you again, I'm afraid, is the question around, I don't know if this is relevant in the Swedish market actually, but does the dashboard display policy information if the policy is being administered manually? Do you have such a thing over there?
We have a few shoeboxes, but they are not connected to the dashboard. But I would say that the dashboard has created a lot of better data quality and also pushed the pension providers to have better data systems. Mm-hmm. So we have information instantly almost today, so it's a big difference if we compare to 2004, when there were a lot of different problems with both data quality and manual handling. We had one of a pay-as-you-go system just indicating, well, we have something here, but we don't know what. So it's also part of getting a dashboard up and running and getting the good information.
Fabulous. Probably one sort of broad question, I think we can all probably have a comment on this as well. So outside of the question that's come in is, outside of the pension industry here in the UK, there's been little publication on the intention to create pension dashboards. So what is the communication and PR needed to support engagement here in the UK, and what do we know of the government plans? Before I come on to the standard life response on what are we doing about understanding this, and we can talk about some of the experiences we've had this week actually. What did Sweden do in terms of communicating and taking this out to market?
In the beginning, we didn't that much actually, because we didn't have any market money, or we didn't find any ways to do it in the beginning. So it's more like a media coverage actually. But before we had to work on this, we didn't have the money, so we had to try to find new ways to get out with the information. So we were using a lot of different distribution channels through the pension providers. They were adding articles or sending out in the pension benefit statement, you should visit the pension dashboard. And actually we had one big market campaign. It was the orange envelope. It was sent out to 6 million people, I think, at that time. we had one folder that was enclosed, engaged to the benefit statement, so we get information about the dashboard. But that's the only thing. And we would try to work a lot together with pension providers, employers, unions, and also the state. And of course, there's a good need for media coverage. Mm-hmm. And you need to have some kind of person who is in the front there too, both from our perspective, but from the pension provider perspective too.
And just following up on that, was that led very much by the state, the messaging around?
Just before it started, it was led by the state. Yeah. But after we started, it was our responsibility.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Well, just expanding on that, this week we've had some discussions with policymakers and other representatives, and we didn't get onto the conversation around how would the media rollout be. More of the conversation was around how could we set expectation on what was going to be delivered and when, and really understanding what day one the dashboard is going to mean for the customer. So what will they be able to see? What will they not be able to see? And I think there was an expectation that perhaps we didn't need to do that before this week, whereas this week I think many of the policymakers we talked to realised that much more work would be needed, working with the media too, to actually set that expectation and say customers on day one will only be able to do X, Y, and Z, whatever that is. Did you have those sorts of problems as well in Sweden about expectation management?
Yeah, it was a huge problem actually, because we had huge expectations in the beginning, and we could see that the users didn't get what we wanted. And you get a problem there, because if people are disappointed, they speak about it. So you don't get any new users who they talk to. So you need to get the ambassadors at first, and then you can try to access new users and try to get new ambassadors. And we would like to have people talk about the dashboard at work, having a fika and discuss it around the coffee table. I think that's the best advertising we can have.
I agree with that. We do like fika actually here at Standard Life. Well, thank you very much. I think we're probably running out of time, so I'll probably draw it to a close. So I'd like to thank our guest speaker, Anders, for joining us over the last few days to share his experience, his insights. We've had a fantastic engagement with stakeholders, including policymakers. We've had the regulators in. We've had open debate with some dinner with some ABC partners last night too. A massive thanks also to Neil and Sharon for joining our panel, and also for you at home for joining us live. Our next event in the Thinking Forward programme will be at the end of June. Look out for more details and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you again.